Dobro. History. Archive.
Today, we're diving into the final, defiant act of a true rock and roll king. It's a story that really all comes down to a single dramatic 24-hour window.
So, November 24th, 1991. The news just breaks everywhere. Freddie Mercury, the larger-than-life, unstoppable frontman of Queen, was gone. He was just 45 years old, and the shock was, well, it was immense. But the real story, the one that truly defines his legacy, actually happened just before this moment.
Because only 24 hours before that news hit, after years and years of vicious rumors and just relentless media speculation, Freddie Mercury had finally confirmed to the world that he had AIDS.
Which, of course, brings up the big question, right? After 4 long years of silence, why would you speak up with only hours left to live? Well, the answer isn't about surrender. No, this was a strategy.
This was his final, brilliant move in a long and really painful game of chess, a checkmate against the very people who had been hounding him for years. Okay, so picture it. It's just after midnight on November 23rd, and this statement gets released to the world's press. It's short, it's direct, and it's brutally honest. The secret was out. But the timing was everything.
You see, by waiting until the absolute last possible moment, he pulled off 2 things just masterfully. First, he completely starved the press of the salacious death watch they were so hungry for. He denied them the chance to turn his final days into a circus. And second, by announcing it at all, he made sure that when he did pass, the story would be told in his words, not in the ugly, homophobic headlines that the tabloids were just waiting to print.
So you have to understand, this was not a man confessing a secret. No way. This was a king making his final move, seizing total control of his own story, of his own legacy. It was a victory.
And to really appreciate just how important that victory was, we need to understand the enemy he was fighting. We need to talk about the relentless hounding of the press.
The public whispers really started to get loud at the 1990 Brit Awards. I mean, the vibrant, strutting peacock we all knew was gone. He was replaced by this frail, kinda gaunt man who just stood in the background and said almost nothing. And that single image? Well, that was all the tabloids needed. By November, The Sun was already running these massive full-page spreads. The public death watch had officially begun.
You know, his bandmate Brian May put it pretty bluntly. He said the press couldn't get the real story, so they just made one up. Roger Taylor was even more direct. He just called them vultures. They were literally camped outside his house, so close that as Freddie lay dying, he could actually see their cigarette smoke rising over his garden wall. Just think about that. So the public perception was of this frail recluse, a prisoner in his own home. But the reality? Oh, the reality was the exact opposite. He wasn't hiding from the world. He was working, caught in this frantic, secret race against the clock.
This private battle he was fighting, it wasn't happening in a sickbed. It was happening in a recording studio. And it all led to one final, incredibly poignant message to the world.
His very last time on camera was for a music video. And the decision to shoot it in black and white? Well, that wasn't just some artistic choice. It was a desperate necessity. They had to hide how sick he really was, to conceal his gaunt frame and the lesions on his skin.
But then, at the very end of the video, he did something completely deliberate. He looked straight down the lens of the camera, right into the eyes of his fans, and he whispers those 3 words, "I still love you." Then he gives this little smile and just walks out of the frame forever. His director even confirmed it later. This was his planned artistic exit, his goodbye. So where was he when he wasn't filming? He was here, in what the band called the cocoon. It was their studio in Switzerland, and it was a total sanctuary for him, a fortress against the outside world, the one place where the disease didn't define him. In there, he was simply a musician again. And inside that cocoon, he gave his band an order. He knew time was running out. He basically told them, just keep writing. Feed me lyrics, feed me melodies. And he would show up whenever he had an hour or 2 of strength, record as much as he possibly could, and then leave it for them to finish after he was gone. He was literally building his own legacy from beyond the grave.
And this dedication, it leads us to the absolute peak of his defiance, a moment that has since become pure rock and roll legend.
Okay, so Brian May writes The Show Must Go On, but he records the demo in this high falsetto because,
Honestly, he's convinced Freddie is way too weak to hit these powerful notes. And he was right to be worried. Freddie shows up to the studio that day in incredible pain, barely able to walk. But he props himself up, looks at Brian and says, "I'll fucking do it, darling." He throws back 2 shots of vodka, walks into the booth, and in one single take, delivers a performance that Brian May could only describe as superhuman.
Now that was a legend, an incredible story, but his actual final performance in a studio, it was a much quieter and honestly a more heartbreaking affair. They were recording the song Mother Love, and he was so weak at this point he could only sing one line at a time. They worked all day long until they got to the very last verse, and Freddie was just spent. He told Brian he needed to rest and that he'd be back to finish it.
He never did. That was the last time he ever stood in a vocal booth. The race was over. Brian May actually had to sing the final verse on the album himself.
And that brings us right back to where we started, to his home in London with all the work finally complete and the end getting closer.
With his voice now immortalized, safe in the studio vaults, he was finally ready. That press statement, it was his last act of total control. He won. He refused to let the press define him. He refused to become a poster child for the horrible stigma of that era, and he absolutely refused to let the disease have the final word. His life was his work, and he worked until his very last ounce of strength was gone.
So no, he didn't die a victim. He died a legend. Not because of how he died, but because of how he chose to live, right up until the final note. He looked death right in the face, and, with his life's work as his testament, he proved that the show would indeed go on.